Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Dan Magistro, and I'm the Research Director here at the International Institute for Analytics. On behalf of IIA, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Competing for Analytics Talent, How to Win the War. For those of you who are new to IIA, this webinar is part of a series we organized to highlight important concepts, techniques, and strategies in the world of business analytics. Co-founded by Tom Davenport and Jack Phillips, IIA is a research and advisory firm that works with companies to grow their capabilities in order to get the most impact from analytics. In our brief history, we've served more than 300 organizations, largely through our network of unbiased analytics experts and practitioners. So before we dive into the presentation, let's go over a few housekeeping items. First, if you have a question at any time during this webinar, please submit it using the Ask a Question button, which is located on the top left-hand side of the BrightTalk player. Your question will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, at the conclusion of today's webinar, please take a moment to rate this presentation and provide feedback by clicking on the Rate This button, which is on the right-hand side of your BrightTalk player. And finally, the recorded version of this presentation will be available using the same URL immediately following its conclusion. So feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues using the social bookmark buttons above your console. Okay, so now I would like to introduce you to our speakers. Today's webinar will focus on analytics talent. As the adoption of a variety of analytics continues to grow across all industries, a key requirement for becoming analytically competitive is that companies of all types, whether they are large enterprises or emerging startups, must invest in their analytics talent. So with the ongoing talent shortage in analytics and the challenges of attracting the right talent, a strategic approach is necessary when recruiting and retaining analytics professionals. To address these challenges and provide actionable guidance, we've invited Birchworks analytics talent experts, Linda Burtch and Katie Prezis, to provide guidance for hiring managers and analytics leaders looking to build and strengthen their analytics teams. So Linda Burtch is the founder and managing director of Birchworks Executive Recruiting. Linda is a leader in analytics and data science recruiting, and she brings more than 30 years of experience in quantitative recruiting. Linda is an active member of the American Statistical Association and Informs, and she's a frequent speaker on big data, career topics, and conducts. Linda's firm publishes the Burtch Works Studies, an annual comprehensive industry report which contains data on compensation as well as demographic and job characteristics for nearly 2,000 predictive analytics professionals. And also joining us from Birchworks is Katie Prezis. She's the Director of Research at Birchworks and is responsible for managing Birchworks salary reports, flash surveys, and other research content. And Katie has more than 7 years of experience in recruiting and market research. So welcome, Linda and Katie.
Thanks so much, Dan, for that very nice introduction. It's great to be here today. For those of you who don't know us, Birchworks is, as Dan mentioned, an executive recruiting firm that specializes in the placement of the quantitative business professionals. So that would include people that are marketing scientists, data scientists, survey research specialists, marketing research people, and credit analytics people, data analytics, all things analytics pretty much. We have a giant network, over 20,000 analytics professionals we follow in the United States. So if there's an analytics team at a company, it's pretty likely I know at least some of their people. I also do a lot of work with companies that are forming groups. So, I guess you could also say that I know about groups that haven't even formed yet. So we're in the business of recruiting, and I am talking to people in analytics on the ground every day, all day. Also, many of you know about our research and the original content that we provide for the field of analytics, and certainly our groundbreaking salary reports. But we also put out blog pieces. We do webinars once or twice a month. Oftentimes we're featured guest speakers, and we participate in many panels during the course of the year. You'll see us quoted in the press occasionally too. So as a matter of fact, on a Friday, we were congratulated by LinkedIn for being the #2 boutique consulting firm in North America for social engagement. so I really want to thank Stacy Bosowski on my staff, who is our social media director. That was quite a coup. Everybody knows big data is everywhere. Analytics and certainly all things analytics are always now pretty much in the headlines. Now this slide shows only the tip of the iceberg on organizations that have quantitative teams across the country. And as I mentioned, new groups are forming pretty much all the time. I think right now here at Burtch Works, we have something in the neighborhood of 125 open jobs that we're working on. And that's across about 80 different companies. So that just gives you an illustration of how hot this market is. Now, as a result of the tremendous visibility in the analytics field, professionals and students of all backgrounds and skill sets are now pretty much flocking into analytics. So kids coming out of college are really nervous about their employability, as some of you might know. And so many have been kind of gravitating toward the STEM disciplines. My daughter Becky is a great example of that. She's finishing up her senior year with a degree in mathematics from Macalester College up in St. Paul and has already accepted a full-time offer for next year. When we were visiting her last weekend during Parents Weekend, as we were getting together with a number of friends over lunch and dinners and so on, I got strict instructions from her not to bring up job searches because everybody was so stressed out about it. And believe me, I'm a mom and I'm a recruiter, and it's really hard for me to keep my mouth shut about these kinds of things. So, but I did. Also, the availability of new and non-traditional educational options are helping to train up people interested in the field. So one day, maybe, just maybe, we'll come close to filling the demand, but we are far from that at this point. Okay, so we have a lot to cover today, so let's just jump in. I want to cover 4 areas. First, definition of predictive analytics professionals and how they might differ a little bit from data scientists. There's a lot of talk about that. Then we'll talk about what these people will cost you. So we'll get into compensation information and how it varies by various kinds of attributes. And then we'll explain the demographic profile of this talent pool. And finally, then, I'm going to close with sharing some thoughts on how you can best position yourself to win this war for talent. So right now, I am going to hand things off to Katie Presses, who is my super amazing manager of research here at Burtch Works. She's all things numbers over here, and she'll start us off by helping to define an analytics professional. Katie.
Well, thanks so much, Linda, and hi, everyone. So let's talk about defining predictive analytics professionals. The rapid expansion of the analytics discipline has led to many, oftentimes inconsistent definitions of predictive analytics professionals and data scientists. So let's talk about how you can discern between the two, as well as distinguish them from other fields such as BI or operations research. So this is our overall definition of predictive analytics professionals. They apply sophisticated quantitative skills to data, describing transactions, interactions, or other behaviors, in order to derive insights and prescribe actions. And of course, in order to do that, there's an implied level of business acumen that's certainly needed to be successful. But the key piece that we focus on is the quantitative skills. So let's talk about that for a minute. Predictive analytics professionals work with vast quantities of structured data to answer business questions by developing models and are able to prescribe actions for the business based on what they've found. Those who end up in predictive analytics generally have had formal training in order to develop those quant skills. So many still have traditional educational backgrounds like a master's or a PhD. More recently, they could also have experience with one of the newer master's programs, such as a master's in predictive or business analytics or even in data science. Even less traditional, but becoming more common, though, are the massive open online courses like Coursera and boot camps offered through organizations like Metis or Galvanize. Some universities, like MIT, are even capitalizing on this trend by offering online courses. Analytics professionals have a tool set that they utilize for their modeling and quantitative work, and the most common choices are SAS, R, and SQL. Analytics pros are starting to dip their toes into other tools like Python, Hive, or Hadoop, which are typical data science tools and platforms, plus data visualization tools. As a quick side note here, several times a year we pose flash surveys to our network of quantitative professionals. We're going to reference these a couple times today, and basically they're quick 1 or 2 question email surveys that we send out to our network, and we're usually able to get several hundred responses within a day or two. And because we know our network, as Linda mentioned, from those quick answers we can layer on top things like industry or location. It's pretty interesting actually. Well anyway, our most popular flash survey is our SAS versus R survey, or this year SAS, R, or Python. For this one, we get clear over 1,000 answers within about 48 hours. It's pretty amazing. So we added Python this year due to popular demand, since many in our network have been learning Python and using it for statistical analysis applications. A few months ago, we asked our network of predictive analytics and data science folks which tool they prefer to use, SAS, R, or Python. These preferences are definitely changing, as this chart shows. SAS was the overwhelming preference when we started our survey back in 2014, but open source tools quickly advanced. And 2016 was the first year in which SAS failed to secure the majority of the votes. But just watch, this will change again as new tools come on stream. It's not about what tool these professionals prefer, it's really about them being adaptable to what new tools are out there.
And I just want to add a quick point on this. You know, one of the things when I'm advising candidates or giving talks about careers. Now, this presentation is more geared on the client side, but when I'm talking to candidates, the one thing that I stress again and again is you need to make sure that you keep your skills fresh, because there's always going to be new tools coming on stream. You know, never again will we see a single software dominate for decades like we have in the past. So everybody has to be aware of that and make sure they keep themselves fresh.
Absolutely true. Okay, so back to how we define predictive analytics professionals. We don't consider the groups listed here to fall within predictive analytics. So survey and marketing researchers, they tend to stay focused on traditional primary and secondary market research. Web analytics, those are the folks who are working with tools like Omniture and Google Analytics. Traditional MBAs also fall outside our definition, as those programs are usually not quantitative enough to build the required skills for predictive analytics. Business intelligence is another area that can sometimes get confused with analytics. However, BI is typically more IT and reporting focused and does not include model development. Nowadays, there are so many titles within so-called analytics groups. It's hard to keep it all straight, and these are just a few examples of that. But one title definitely seems to have eclipsed them all, and that, of course, is data scientist. But due to the increasing popularity of this term, many professionals and companies have been using it, even for roles that aren't quite, quote-unquote, true data science. But I know, what's our definition of a data scientist, right? Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. Here at Birchworks, we consider data science to be a combination of the predictive analytics skills we've been talking about and a computer science skill set. So what do I mean by that? Well, in addition to the predictive analytics skills we've been talking about, data scientists have deeper coding and programming knowledge. So they might utilize Java, C++, Python. They utilize unstructured or streaming data like video, audio, social media, sensor data, or even long blocks of language. Data scientists work with a variety of data sources and infrastructures as well. So traditional relational database structures like SQL, plus non-relational big data technologies like Hadoop and Spark. They spend the bulk of their time organizing and structuring data. And so because data scientists can handle data in all its forms, from the unstructured stream through analysis and reporting, a greater emphasis on those computer science skills is required, in addition to the strong math needed for all predictive analytics professionals.
I know that earlier this week when we were going through a dry run on this webinar, Dan had a question about this very thing, because I think it's very controversial on what is a true data scientist and what's not, because it's so commonly used. So if you have any questions or want us to clarify that, don't be shy. Be sure to ask. One of my clients, interestingly enough, sort of lamented that no one wants to to just be a statistician anymore. And I thought that spoke volumes to me. So.
Yeah, so jumping back to tools really briefly, there are definitely clear differences in the tool preferences between data scientists and traditional predictive analytics professionals. As you can see, this year, SAS and R were in a dead heat within predictive analytics, which is on the right here, while data scientists overwhelmingly prefer open source options like Python and R. So what's the point of all this, right? Well, here's the point. Although you'll frequently find overlap in responsibilities and similar job titles, predictive analytics professionals and data scientists have different skills, which are accompanied by very different salary bands. And Linda is going to show you what we're talking about there in just a few minutes. So before hiring, carefully evaluate the position you have open to determine whether it requires a predictive analytics expert or a data scientist, or even whether the position is better described as market research, business intelligence, operations research, or another area. Okay, so now we're going to talk about salary trends within analytics so you can understand the cost of this talent. For the past 4 years, as Dan mentioned, Burtch Works has published salary reports. They've been widely distributed and mentioned several times in the popular press in places like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Forbes. We currently have 3 report series that we offer, one for predictive analytics, one for data scientists, and one for market research. We have analyzed and reported on thousands of data points from individuals across the U.S. working at hundreds of companies, and it's all free and available on our website. Just last month, we released our 4th annual report for predictive analytics, and today we're going to share some of the highlights from that. We cover quite a bit in our full report, though, including what you see here, and this year's report included data on more than 1,200 professionals. Really quickly, I want to review how we categorize analytics professionals for our studies. When we analyze our data, we first drop each professional into a category, either as an individual contributor or a manager, which you'll hear us call ICs and MGs. We then further categorize them into one of 3 levels. We'll use these as we talk about our data, and I'm going to pass things back to Linda now so she can dive into the salary figures. Linda?
Yep. Thank you, Katie. Well, early on, it was pretty clear to me as the whole analytics career path started to explode about 5 years ago that there was really no information available on how much these people make. Many times I would hear the human resources groups trying to sort of equate them with the IT salary bands. I guess they were thinking, after all, they both use computers a lot, right? Well, these are my people, and we know how much they make, not from random surveys or from human resources salary bands, but from continuous one-on-one interviews and engagement with our contacts. So I've been in this business so long that I've placed husbands, wives, and I'm even now placing sons and daughters. So that's a little crazy, but I've been doing this a long, long time, and so we know what we're talking about when it comes to compensation. So let's get into the specifics on salaries. So here in this chart, you can see how salaries increase as experience and management responsibilities increase. Makes sense pretty much, right? That's pretty obvious. And these, just to point out, are median base salaries and do not include any sort of bonus. I decided early on to break out the data scientists from the predictive analytics professionals because it was pretty clear to me that their compensation was significantly different. And this chart shows you how much those salaries differ between those 2 sets of people. Obviously, at the individual contributor level, it's going to be greater. Once they get into management, other skills pretty much come into play and become more critical, and so the salary differences are less. So it's important for you to be very careful and figure out exactly what it is you're looking for. Is it a data science role? Are you working with streams of data or unstructured data? Or is it a more straightforward predictive analytics role where everything is pretty structured? It really does pay to know the difference between the 2. So not only do we look at salaries overall, but we slice the data by education, region, and industry. So let's take a look at that next. Generally speaking, those with a PhD are paid more than those with a master's degree. Again, pretty obvious. And again, it's more true for individual contributors. Now, if you download our full report, you'll see that for professionals who move into management positions, holding a PhD has, again, a much less impact on salaries as those leadership skills become a lot more important. Now let's see how geography impacts salaries. At almost every job level, individuals in the Northeast and on the West Coast earn higher salaries. And this is an example, it's one example at the IC3 level, but it also holds true for the other levels as well. But I will add that the compensation premium on the coast does not make up for the cost of living differences. So one of the questions that we get quite a lot has to do with, well, I am a company that's not in California. How do I compete for that kind of talent? And, you know, in my comments, I mean, there's a couple of sort of quick ways you could do it, sometimes not realistic, though. So the obvious thing, of course, is to consider remote workers and remote employees. That doesn't always work, or and it's oftentimes not optimal. Many companies have actually opened remote offices in California, or even downtown offices if they're in the suburbs of major metropolitan areas. So what I do when I'm working with clients is focus my search for their people locally first and then regionally. And then the other thing to remember is it's very important to court your candidates, and not only the candidates, but also the family. So I had one candidate who was looking at a relocation from the East Coast here to Chicago. This was a handful of years ago. He had a couple of young daughters and a wife, and so he went to the interview. It went very well. Everybody was excited, but they knew they had to convince the family. So my client sent out a couple of deep dish Chicago-style pizzas, and that did the trick. He took the job. So maybe not because of that, but it worked out. But these little things are important. The other thing I'll quickly add is that things are changing. New predictive analytics programs, the master's programs, are now pretty much everywhere. And a lot of people don't want to go to California, and then also California people will start to want to move away as they start to mature a little bit, start their families, and so on. So kind of keep that in mind. I mean, it's tough right now, but within a few short years, I think we'll have a pretty significant pool of people all across the country that have analytics profiles.
Hey, Linda, you mentioned that these salaries don't include bonuses.
Yep.
I'm curious from your perspective, are bonuses usually a big part of, like in the case of this data, it's level 3, so these are more experienced individual contributors.
Yes.
Do you see that bonuses tend to be a big part of their compensation, maybe relative to kind of commensurate experience in other functions like marketing or finance or IT? Or right. is it maybe even less so than other functions?
No, that's an excellent question, and we were trying to keep this within the hour, so we eliminated the whole discussion on bonus because it does vary from industry to industry and level to level so much. It's very broad. And also, bonuses are bonuses. They're not always guaranteed. So that's something else that you need to sort of keep in mind. It is an important factor for a lot of our candidates, but it's not the primary one. The more senior you go, the more important it becomes. And also, of course, equity is something that people are taking a really hard look at. Again, I've seen that come and go, too. I mean, every time there's a recession, everybody starts focusing back on base salaries again and not on bonuses after a year or two of very slim bonuses or no bonuses, or seeing sort of their equity sort of evaporate. So it depends. Right now, there's more emphasis still on bonuses and equity, though.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that part of the intent of my question is, as I think about how predictive analytics professionals are positioned within companies, if their position in the company as it kind of migrates over time, maybe more from back office into middle office or front office type roles and exposure, if you've seen kind of an evolution in bonus structures to reflect their maybe a closer connection to business performance or anything like that. You're right, it is probably a talk all into itself, but looking at this map, I wonder if kind of some of the variability in how different regions will do bonuses or something might help create more discrimination among these regions in salary.
Right. And you know, I would say that out on the West Coast, bonuses can be more aggressive, but oftentimes it can go the other way too, where bonuses are slim, but equity is a big piece of the compensation carrot.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Great. Okay. So let's talk next about how salaries vary by industry. Here you can see an example of industry trends with salaries for IC3s. You can see that consulting usually pays the most. Part of that's because of the heavy travel component, whereas retailers are the least aggressive. Okay, so next let's talk about what candidates can earn when they jump ship. And you can see more clearly than what you're up against. In an analysis we did early this year for a blog piece, we assessed how salaries of predictive analytics people increase when they change companies. The data showed 13.3%. And here's an illustration, this next slide, at the distribution of those increases. So you're able to see that most people see somewhere in the range of 10 to 15%. This information is really important in recruiting to understand where you need to be with offers. So let's next talk about demographic details of the analytics candidate. Katie?
So an understanding of what demographic traits are most common can help inform your recruiting strategy. So first, and we think this one is really important when you're recruiting, is residency status, especially if you're looking for junior level talent. I'm sure you know many in the analytics profession are foreign born. Our data show that 38% of predictive analytics professionals are non-U.S. citizens, and these numbers stay pretty consistent year over year. And these are the folks with an F1 or an OPT, an H-1B, a green card, or another visa that allows them to work in the United States. When you're hiring, this is why it's critical to consider transferring or sponsoring H-1B visas if you want to have access to the entire analytics talent pool. If you don't, then it's kind of like recruiting with one hand tied behind your back. This is especially true, as I mentioned, at the junior level. You can see here the bottom two bars how a significant amount, nearly a majority of IC1s and 2s are foreign born and looking for visa support. So are you looking for a leg up on your competition? Consider H1 and OPT candidates. It can give you a significant advantage and positively impact your recruiting strategy. Now let's look at education, which also stays pretty consistent from year to year. The overwhelming majority of predictive analytics professionals, 86%, have an advanced degree, either a master's or a PhD. 13% have a bachelor's degree.
You know, I want to break in here, though. I predict, though, we'll see this distribution change as time goes on here. I think there's going to be a lot more bachelor's degree that enhance their skills through these alternative educational options like the MOOCs and the boot camps, and not invest so much in a master's degree. So we'll see how that turns out. And part of that, I think, is going to be driven by the very quick change up of the skills and technology that's going on out there right now.
Yeah, so although predictive analytics professionals are highly educated and often come with an advanced degree, you might want to think twice before putting those sort of strict educational requirements on your job descriptions. As Linda just mentioned, it's possible that the skills you're looking for are attainable without that formal credential that you may have been used to seeing in the past. So next I want to talk about industry. financial services and marketing and advertising companies continue to be the largest employers of predictive analytics professionals, accounting for over 50% this year. There were some incremental increases in several other industries, though, like tech, as use cases for analytics continue to diversify. So just look at the variety here.
Yeah, it's funny. We know a guy who went from Caterpillar to Victoria's Secret, which I think is a great illustration of somebody crossing industries.
Yeah, that's quite the transition there. So, as you can imagine, given the diversity of industry backgrounds within analytics, you should consider applicants from other verticals when you're recruiting. Just think, if you take a look at this chart, if you aren't open to financial services candidates, as an example, you could cut your talent pool by a third just like that. So next, how experienced are those in analytics? Well, 50% of predictive analytics professionals have fewer than 10 years of experience. This is important for a couple reasons, but the main one is be ready to teach business acumen and also the ability to wrap a story around data. These are not things that come naturally, so it really needs to be encouraged.
And also, it's not that's not something that you learn in school, and so a lot of the candidates in analytics really are focused on the rigorous mathematics and statistics and classes, and they're not really formally taught any of this stuff. So it really is up to the employer to make sure they bring these folks up to speed in those areas.
Yeah, and since the field skews younger and those business skills are developed over time, you might want to plan to impart those skills by encouraging your youngsters to keep up with the news, promote conference attendance, and plan to provide a significant amount of one-on-one training to put business problems into context. Also, if you're looking for a seasoned leader who brings 15 or 20 years of experience, you should know that the pool of talent you'll be dipping into is a small one. Related to this is how long you might expect people to stay on your team. Earlier this year for our blog, we did an analysis of the average tenure of analytics professionals, looking at how long they tend to stay at one company. Our results showed that the average was only 2.6 years. And this rang true with what we anecdotally see as recruiters. Folks tend to stay for about 2 to 4 years. If you're expecting your staff to stay put for 5, 10, 15 years, good luck with that.
And also, at this point, again, with technology changing so quickly, you probably don't want that. It's good to have some healthy turnover.
Yeah. So while offering competitive salaries and retention bonuses can stem the tide for a time, some attrition is to be expected, and you can plan for it. The nature of the hiring market is changing, and the likelihood that millennials will stay at their current jobs for the next decade is pretty much zero. Now, I'm a millennial, but Linda, don't get nervous or anything.
You better not be going anywhere, Katie.
So, I think employees now also understand that companies will periodically right-size or downsize as business needs dictate. So, Linda, do you want to take it from here and talk about exactly how hiring authorities can come out ahead?
Sure, Katie, thanks. So now you know all about compensation and you know about demographic attributes. So let's finish up with getting into the specifics on how you can attract and retain talent. So specific strategies. Well, we're all painfully aware that the market for analytics professionals is very active. When we took a look at our LinkedIn network early this year, we found that 20% of analytics professionals got a new job in 2015, which was even higher than what it was in 2014. Now, these are the people who actually changed companies, so it doesn't include people that maybe were promoted or switched into another department at their existing firms. So these figures really do drive home the fact that you have a lot of competition. So here's another number. We sent out a flash survey just a couple of weeks ago asking quantitative hiring authorities about their hiring plans for the remainder of 2016. A little more than 84% said that they have plans to hire before the end of the year. And we're definitely feeling this here at Birchworks. It's kind of odd that during Q4 we're receiving as many calls as we have been getting lately about brand new positions opening up. Now, When we asked more specifically about their reason for hiring, more than half said they were adding to their headcount. In addition to that, 11% said that not only were they adding to their staffs, but they also had to fill positions that had been vacated through turnover. And I'll tell you, these are my clients that are the most crazed. So what is it you can do to stand out? Let's talk about what motivates analytics pros to change jobs. So here we asked analytics professionals to choose their top 2 motivating factors when they consider changing jobs. And you know, there's no surprise here. Salaries is still the top motivating factor, but a close second is opportunities for advancement. And the other factor that's particularly important, and I hear this all the time when I'm talking to my candidates, is they want interesting and challenging work. So what does this mean? Salaries are not the only important thing, are not the only thing that analytics professionals look for when they're evaluating opportunities. And in fact, we found that 61% of analytics professionals receive some form of what I would call non-traditional benefits, and that's kind of aside from the typical things like bonuses and stock and insurance benefits and 401k programs and so on. Perks that analytics professionals mentioned received ranging from some of the more common benefits like extra paid time off and work from home options to, you know, of course, free food and drinks, to more unique benefits like one guy said an on-site woodworking shop, and there were a bunch of others. Kitty, what were some of the other ones we heard about?
Oh, let's see. I think some of our favorites were someone told us about nap rooms that they have on site, a putting green. Of course, there were lots of kegs and ping pong tables, even a screen printing shop, I guess, if you want to make your own T-shirt in the middle of the day. So a lot of variety there.
Wow. Okay, so I want to talk next about the 4 ways to attack the challenge of building and maintaining an analytics team. First, let's talk about what's important internally. So number 1, you need to have top-level buy-in on leveraging analytics throughout the company. And believe me, senior candidates ask me about this all the time. And especially if this is a newly formed group, you know, they really want to hear that they have the CEO and board backing and a good-sized budget. Oftentimes, too, the CEO will be the one driving this whole initiative. So also they want to make sure that they have a seat at the table, and that kind of goes back to what Dan was saying. You know, no longer is analytics considered a backroom role. It really is and should be front and center because it's really it feeds right into overall corporate strategy. So one of the questions is, where in the organization does the analytics team sit? And let me give you a hint. Don't say the IT group. So anyway, and everybody wants to know, what's the visibility? Who am I going to be talking to? Do I have direct contact with the stakeholders and so on and so forth? So since tools and methodologies evolve so quickly, make sure your department has the latest and best tools, and that can be a major draw to candidates, especially young ones. It's also much better to be open to different software. So as an example, younger professionals are coming out of academic programs now with R and Python experience, and they're sometimes pretty resistant to switching over to SAS. So be sure that you're very open to that. The other thing that I want to add there is, you know, it's again, and it kind of goes back to what we've been saying a couple of times earlier, and it's not even about R and Python anymore. It's really about what's next, what's coming down the road, and making sure that you stay fresh. So next, during the recruiting process, it's important to make sure that you trim your wish list, meaning make sure you prioritize your needs rather than have a laundry list, because if you do have a laundry list, you'll never fill the job. So I had a couple of years ago, I had a human resources person ask me for somebody that had 8 years experience in a Hadoop environment. And I was like, okay, that's going to be impossible. So make sure you get away from having this skills checklist. You really need to evaluate if the candidates have the smarts and the aptitude to pick up on what it is you need them to have. When you do find your candidate, make sure you act decisively and move them through your recruiting process swiftly. And since this market is so hot, many candidates will be weighing multiple offers, so it's critically important for you to make sure that your firm leaves a positive impression and make it memorable. So this includes making sure your hiring process is streamlined and buttoned up.
That's absolutely true, Linda. Just to interrupt here for a second, especially nowadays with things like Glassdoor, you need to do everything you can to protect your employment brand. Many candidates, especially juniors, will read your Glassdoor reviews before an interview. I think our recruiters are always griping, don't read those Glassdoor. It makes their job harder. So, make sure you only give them good things to say and that you have your best interviewers prepped and ready to go for those in-person meetings. We have candidates tell us all the time that they're kind of paring down their LinkedIn profiles to bare bones because they're just inundated with requests from recruiters and internal recruiters about different job opportunities. And if that's one of the tools that you use, that's great. Just make sure that you're sending, personalized messages, maybe call out something specific on their LinkedIn profile that drew you to them so that they know you're a real person and that it wasn't, one of 100 messages that went out that day.
One of the things I like to tell our clients is that, because of this problem with LinkedIn and these candidates that are just inundated with job opportunities even when they're not looking. People and young people tell me they get 2 or 3 a day, so they're just being inundated by all this. And what I consider to be Birchworks' secret sauce is the fact that we can kind of break through all that clutter for our clients because we're engaged with the community, and many people know us, and we're engaged with them whether or not they're actively on the job market and making a job change. So
yeah, the other thing I wanted to jump in here while we're talking about recruiting process is don't have them do the 8-hour homework assignment. If you're Google, okay, that's fine, they'll probably do it. But if you're not, then you'll probably just lose them. People don't want to do those things. So try to cut it out of your process if you can.
Yeah. And I also think that communication should be prompt and transparent. It's kind of amazing sometimes how long it takes to get feedback. And, candidates get really discouraged and leave with a negative impression when that kind of thing happens. So, again, make that interview process seamless. And you got to keep in mind, you have to sell also. Certainly the candidate is there to interview with you, but it is a candidate-driven market, so you need to make sure you're always putting your best foot forward. So now let's get on to compensation strategies here. Make sure the offer is strong and fair. Know the candidate's existing salary and what they're expecting. We here at Birchworks really take a lot of time to drill down on the details on compensation very early on in any kind of intake call, just to make sure that there are no last-minute surprises, that we're not wasting anybody's time, and you really want somebody to say yes at the end of the process. And if you're very clear on compensation expectations and what the client's able to do, that makes for a much smoother close. So a sign-on bonus is another way to sweeten the pot if you have salary band constraints that you're working with. And more often than not, candidates are getting these sign-on bonuses as incentives to close deals. So if a candidate has to relocate, it's really important also to understand that situation early on in the process. As an example, Katie and I were working with a great East Coast client of ours earlier this summer, and they were looking for their analytics leader, their first quant person. So, and I remember that when we first presented our candidate's resume, and this was the person who ended up taking the position ultimately, The human resources partner was asking how much his house was worth, how marketable it was, what neighborhood he was living in, and all these kinds of details. And I was so impressed because that's the kind of stuff we do, but oftentimes our clients, kind of think of that at the last minute. So being ahead of these things really makes a difference. So, and I'm happy to report that I'm seeing relocation packages becoming more comprehensive once again. Equity also is now becoming very much a consideration for candidates. So figure out what the candidate's current situation is and see what you can do to accommodate that. So once you get your staff, how do you retain them? So as I mentioned earlier, challenging and interesting work is an absolute key driver in retention. Many candidates come to me because they're bored doing the same thing. They're not getting enough variety, and they're not learning anything new. So the harder the problem for most of these people, the more motivated they tend to be, which is a great thing. That's a great thing. So that goes right into giving them opportunities to learn new skills, using cutting-edge tools, and also, of course, giving them lots of visibility. Again, this kind of speaks to teaching them the importance of business acumen and the art of storytelling. I had one client was telling me about he sort of discovered one of the new guys on the staff was kind of a Python wizard, and so he set up a series of lunch and learns for anybody in the organization who wanted to learn Python and put this young guy in charge of it, which I thought was, it's stuff like that that I think is really very, very helpful. It not only builds the skill set of your team, but it also builds loyalty to your organization. So now also flexible hours or maybe work from home options are also very much appreciated. So if you can be generous. But no, you're still going to have attrition, as Katie mentioned, so you've got to plan for it. One thing I wanted to mention was out in Silicon Valley, employers and employees are now starting to consider their current job more like a tour of duty before they move on to what's next. Now, I can't say that I'm 100% behind that idea, but it's really important for everybody to take note of that pattern. So we just gone through tons of information, and we went through it fast. And I know you're still dying for more, so I'm going to turn this back over to Katie, and she's going to share with you how you can access more of our research.
Perfect. Thanks, Linda. If you're hiring and looking for additional resources, of course, you can download our full salary reports at birchworks.com/study. Our reports each have more than 30 pages of insights, and we have separate PDFs for predictive analytics, data science, and market research professionals. To keep up with the latest, you can follow Birchworks on social media, including LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. We share our latest research, webinars, and more. Our blog is also a great resource for our clients. Linda and our experienced team of recruiters regularly post information relevant to analytics, whether it's industry trends, advice, or flash surveys. And of course, if you're staffing up your team this year or thinking about your 2017 plans already, let's definitely talk. Feel free to send an email directly to Linda at lburch@birchworks.com. We love brainstorming with clients and getting to know your organization. Even if there aren't any, immediate hiring needs, we enjoy having those introductory calls. You never know when we might be able to help. Isn't that right, Linda? I feel like you have a few of those calls a week.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, over the past several months, we've been approached by a handful of consulting firms like PwC and BCG, and even our friends at IIA, looking for us to work with their clients and kind of partner up on providing advice related to their analytics teams. Things like salary and titles and levels and that kind of stuff, and just search strategies also. So one specific one, it was actually based in Miami, and this happened about a month ago, and there was a client was really concerned about trying to recruit from Miami with everything that's going on with the Zika situation. So we were talking about potential solutions for them. So a lot of clients do come to us looking for their first hire, so I love working on jobs like that.
Yeah, we recruit at all levels, so folks coming right out of their master's programs all the way up to chief analytics officers, chief data scientists, and we provide both contingency and retained services. So depending on if you're developing a team or looking for that leader, we've likely worked on something similar and can bring those insights to your search.
So now I'm going to pass things back to Dan. It looks like we've got some questions, and I think we have a little bit of time left for that. So Dan, thanks so much for having us. It's really been fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. So when we do these webinars, we get kind of the usual questions coming in, and it's been fun watching the questions for this one come in because they span from very kind of strategic talent, kind of organizational management questions to individuals basically posting their resume for you to review. We're getting quite a range of questions, which is I absolutely love. So I'll moderate. I'll ask a few questions that I've picked from the questions that we got, as well as my own. The first one, I want to go back to your point that you made around short tenure. This came up in one of the questions as well, and you made the comment kind of quickly that it can be healthy for staying fresh, kind of as an organization. Do you see employers posting roles externally, maybe in cases where they have internal candidates, with that kind of freshening their tools knowledge or their skills, maybe more so than you see in other areas?
Yeah, I would say that is a yes and no answer. Yes, I think that they do. A lot of companies nowadays are continuously looking for analytics professionals simply because the positions are so difficult to find. But they're also sort of trolling internally for people who might be interested, because there's always, and especially at the IC1, IC2 level, there's always openings, and people want to get trained up and learn something new and move around within the organization. So they come with domain experience, but they might be lacking sort of quantitative depth. So you'd have to bring them along in some of the other areas. But if they have the aptitude and interest, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Maybe related to that, this was one of the questions we got. Do you see regional differences in tenure a lot?
Yes.
Just based on the nature of loyalty or culture?
Right. And it's a little bit anecdotal. It'd be interesting to do an analysis of that. That might be an interesting slice and dice of the data. But California definitely has higher turnover. Some of that is because people, it's kind of that startup craze that's going on out there, and a lot of startups don't work out. So you'll see people that have jobs for 6 months and then move on, and they'll have 4 jobs in 2 years, something like that. If you're in the across the Midwest, or people that are specifically tied to a geographic area, let's say Cincinnati, you will have longer tenure.
Yeah, that's great. And then you talked about kind of being creative from a kind of a talent attracting standpoint or talent organizing standpoint around creating flexibility or having virtual kind of talent working virtually, or maybe even setting up shop in other places to where analytics talent might be more available or might want to live more. This is something I call the Kansas City question, because we know a company in Kansas City who has a really, really strong company who had a lot of challenges back a couple of years attracting talent to Kansas City in their organization. So they actually created an entire strategy of using remote resources that would come to Kansas City for 6 months, be trained up, and then work remotely out of their homes or wherever. Is that something that you really see happening a lot? And is that being driven? Is that happening more in geographies, in specific geographies?
Well, you know what I think? Yes, I mean, there's a whole. We all know about all the labs that are out in California. Verizon has one in San Francisco, as does Walmart. Because data scientists really weren't keen to going to Bentonville. And so Sears has one. There's a whole lot of them out in the San Francisco area. So they, sort of set up offices out there. That's one strategy that I've seen. I've not heard that the option that you talked about. The other thing that I've heard about recently was companies setting up sort of satellite labs close to academic institutions, and then sort of bringing in interns that are working, let's say, 10 to 15 to 20 hours a week, and then pulling from them to they're using it as a feeder to permanent hires once they graduate. So that's another sort of creative idea that I've heard about recently.
Yeah, that's great. The other comment you made that I think kind of probably got some reaction from our listeners. I know that we had 2 questions related to it. You made the comment around analytics placement, like where in the organization you are, and you said don't say the IT group.
Yep.
So
right.
Why not the IT group?
Because IT is generally considered to be a operations function within an organization, and analytics professionals really look at themselves as providers of insights and directly impacting corporate strategy. IT, I have seen quantitative teams under IT, but boy, I will tell you that the candidates always balk when they see that because they really think of it as being too report-oriented or keeping the lights on and the computers running. They don't really consider it to be part of corporate decision-making.
Yeah, I love your perspective because we support many companies, and where analytics teams should live is definitely one of the very common things that we will work with them on. And I think the analytics talent attraction piece is, I think that isn't even one of the major considerations that I think should be in terms of where to position the team is, will you attract the right kind of talent? Will the job description and the hiring manager be kind of be optimal for what they're looking for? So it's a really great point that you made. I completely agree. Maybe the last question comes from me, and this is maybe from my past in recruiting analytics positions in large companies, or needing to fill them as a hiring manager. My sense then, and still my sense now, is that analytics recruiting in particular can really benefit, especially from external recruiting firms like Birchworks, because there are these additional challenges beyond just finding the talent in terms of defining the needs in the position, the expertise that HR would need to have, or the talent acquisition team would need to have to even articulate some of the needs or to vet skills for potential applicants. There's just more knowledge that one needs to have. I guess you agree with that because your firm exists. But,
well, thanks for that.
But
nice
maybe a story, but maybe a story around that, where because I think do you see that, is that changing? Do you see companies getting better themselves at kind of truing up their talent acquisition teams to do some of this, where there's always going to be the need, but that companies are getting better at understanding what their needs really are?
Well, yes and no. It depends. I spend a lot of time advising my clients on what's available out there, what's doable, what's real, as opposed to what they sort of dreaming about, I guess. And we really drill down on what is it that you need. Give me some hard examples of the kinds of projects you want this person to be involved in, and then I can sort of figure out, is this a predictive analytics professional, is this a data scientist, is this a survey researcher, or is this a web analytics person? So it's kind of easy for me to do that because I'm constantly sort of evaluating not only candidates but also jobs and what the needs are. But there's a real trick to getting people to come on board all the way through the process, from the very first intake call that I have or my team has with the candidates, through the interviewing process, through the closing process and offer, to getting them onboarded. It's a tricky thing, and it's not. Oftentimes it's mishandled, and people, the clients will spend a lot of time and lose people as a result, and that's really bad, and it's just really very, very disappointing. And so that's where again my value add comes in. Because I've done this so many times, hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. The other thing, I think, for HR professionals on the other side of it, if they have a ton, hundreds of openings that they're working on every year, analytics might be 1, 2, 3 of them. So it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to invest in, an analytics recruiter to fill those positions. And I'm always amazed when Linda or other recruiters are on the phone with new clients. They're pulling candidate names off the top of their head who'd be perfect fits for these. that those internal recruiters, they're just not going to know the market as well. It's pretty amazing, actually. I'm always flabbergasted that they're able to pull these names out of the sky here. So.
Yeah, those are good points, and yeah, I agree. By the way, before I wrap up, just a comment on the IT remark. That's kind of the tweetable moment of this webinar for sure. There's been some comments, and I will say that just there are many different ways that analytics talent can be organized, kind of positioned for success in organizations, and it covers the range. And IT definitely is evolving as a way of supporting and servicing analytics work within organizations. So yeah, I think definitely. There's not a one-size-fits-all here by any means. But okay, so just to wrap up the presentation, I just want to thank both of you, Linda and Katie, and to all of you who joined the call today, and for sharing all your great questions. As a reminder, the recorded version of this presentation will be available using the same URL immediately following its conclusion, so feel free to share it with your friends and all of your colleagues. And for those of you who have joined us and aren't already clients of IIA, I'd encourage you to visit iianalytics.com or follow us on Twitter at iianalytics to access some of our written research and learn more about what we do here at IIA to support your analytics programs. With that, thanks again to Linda and Katie, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.